I remember exactly where I was when Matthew Perry passed. I was actually in New York with Dr. Sarah and with Alex, and we were at the show. Katie Mack, who is the producer of Fucking Sober, the first 90 days, she was producing an off-Broadway production, a one-woman production called #UglyCry. And it was a production that encouraged the audience to be on their phone during the show, which is not normal. Normally, they want you to put your phones away when you're in the theater. But she wanted you to engage with her Instagram feed. And she had a screen on the stage that she would project her Instagram feed up to. It was all very immersive. And she was also running on a treadmill almost the entire performance, which that's a whole nother episode. We can talk about that later. But that is where we were when she was scrolling through her Facebook feed as part of the performance, and we saw that it had just been announced that Matthew Perry had died. And I thought, is this part of the show? Because this is really dark. I don't think this is funny at all. And then instantaneously, I could feel my phone just started blowing up with everybody that knows me and knows my affinity for sober pop culture started wanting to make sure I knew that this had just happened. And so I will never forget where I was and what was happening. And it was tough. It was tough to sit there and think about that, which is strange to say because obviously I've never met Matthew Perry. It's not like we're besties, but that's the kind of effect he had on people, right? He had that effect that you felt like you knew him. Welcome to the Sober Curator podcast, where sobriety isn't just a lifestyle choice, it's the ultimate life hack. I'm Alysse Bryson, your fearless guide to a world where hangovers are canceled, fun is mandatory, and we still know how to shut down a dance floor, just with better shoes.
And I'm Tamara Routley, aka T-Bouge, your co-pilot, chaos coordinator, and the one who keeps Alysse from turning this podcast into a full-blown reality show. Buckle up, sober party people.
From lifestyle and travel to pop culture and zero-proof cocktails, we're serving up the stories, trends, and guests that prove sobriety isn't just about what you're missing. It's about finally remembering where you left your keys. Let's get the party started. Welcome back to the Sober Curator podcast. Today, we're diving into Matthew Perry, the Hollywood Reporter documentary, a look at the life, the struggles, and the legacy of one of the most beloved actors of our generation. We've got a full house today. Several of our Sober Curators have watched the doc, and we are going to break it all down. And just to give you a quick synopsis or a summary of the documentary, this documentary that is now streaming on Peacock, unless you're in Canada, you should be able to see it. This documentary doesn't just focus on his fame from Friends. It digs deep into his addiction, his recovery, and his passion for helping others get sober. And because we're the Sober Curator, we're going to bring some pop culture and some fun into the conversation that is otherwise really sad and tragic. And so I would like to start off with some trivia, some fun trivia, because in one of the opening scenes of this documentary, you see a drone, I think, is kind of zooming over his house. That was probably, footage they caught when it got called in. And you see a red Batman glowing from the bottom of his pool, his very large pool. And in case you didn't know, Matthew Perry was obsessed with Batman. And so obsessed, in fact, he had his friends refer to him as Matman. And does anyone want to take a guess of how much money he spent to put that glow-in-the-dark red Matman light up at the bottom of his pool? Any guesses?
$1 million.
Ding, 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 ding. Kim, you win your very own Matman Funko. Thanks for playing. Yes, $1 million. $1 million he paid for that. And I got to thinking after I went down a deep Google to find this very important trivia, I got to thinking, what happened with the new owners of the house? Do you think they kept it in there? Do you think they understand? I had so many questions about it that unfortunately Chat GPT, which I have named mine Charlie, as has Tamar, because we're Charlie's Angels and we like to talk to our AI, and more importantly, we like the way our AI bots talk to us. So we were having a long conversation about it, and I just thought that was a really interesting fact. It's also really sad because he was basically adjacent the pool. He died in his hot tub. Right. And so he was adjacent the pool where that Matman, signal. If you were flying above, you would be able to point out his house very easily. And then, of course, we know the last picture that he posted of himself on his Instagram was also in his hot tub. So we're going to start with some pop culture, and then we quickly transitioned into some sadness. So I guess I would like to hear the first reactions from each of you. And before we get started, I should introduce who we have here with us today, because we've got a group of rock star sober curators from all over the country, from the Best Coast to the East Coast, and even up into Canada. Sorry, Alex. I know I just threw shade at you, but we've got Alexandra Nyman is here. She's the one on the East Coast, and she is the publisher of the Sober Curator, as well as the founder of the Break Free Foundation. Hi, Alex. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me from the Beast Coast.
The Beast Coast. And then we have Dr. Sarah. We love Dr. Sarah. She's also on the Beast Coast, and she's coming to us from somewhere outside of the Boston area, deep in some cabin in the woods.
In the middle of the woods.
In the middle of the woods. And if you are not following along with Dr. Sarah and Leaving Crazy Town, she loves to talk about all things codependency, and she's also a sober cougar. That's right, y'all. She is dating someone in sobriety that is younger in sobriety than she is. That is what we call a sober cougar. And if you haven't read that article on the site, then you need to get over to the sobercurator.com right now. Next up, we have Megan Swan. She is our friendly Canadian to the north, hailing from the Calgary area, and she is our health and wellness expert. So anytime we get off track in this conversation, she's going to bring calm and reason to the conversation. Next up, we have, sounds about right? I'm doing pretty good with the intros. Next, we have Kim Parsley, and Kim loves to curate all things vintage and bar tools, which is really cool. If you have not started following the Happy Traveler on Instagram and on her site, you're definitely going to want to see the bar kits that she puts together. She curated one just for me that is Barbie themed that I very much love. And last but not least, we have Amy Liz Harrison. She is my ride or die. She is the one that if I call her and say, grab your seltzer, we're riding at dawn, she doesn't ask questions. She just says, what time are you picking me up? So welcome to the show, everyone. I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you.
And, I'm trying to be upbeat about a very sad situation, and I don't want that to translate as I'm making fun or any jokes of this. I am a huge Matthew Perry fan. I'm a huge Friends fan. I remember exactly where I was when Matthew Perry passed. I was actually in New York with Dr. Sarah and with Alex, and we were at the show. Katie Mack, who is the producer of Fucking Sober, the first 90 days, she was producing an off-Broadway production, a one-woman production called #UglyCry. And it was a production that encouraged the audience to be on their phone during the show, which is not normal. Normally, they want you to put your phones away when you're in the theater. But she wanted you to engage with her Instagram feed. And she had a screen on the stage that she would project her Instagram feed up to. It was all very immersive. And she was also running on a treadmill almost the entire performance, which that's a whole nother episode. We can talk about that later. But that is where we were when she was scrolling through her Facebook feed as part of the performance, and we saw that it had just been announced that Matthew Perry had died. And I thought, is this part of the show? Because this is really dark. I don't think this is funny at all. And then within instantaneously, I could feel my phone just started blowing up with everybody that knows me and knows my affinity for sober pop culture started wanting to make sure I knew that this had just happened. And so I will never forget like where I was and what was happening. And it was tough. It was tough to like sit there and think about that, which is strange to say because obviously I've never met Matthew Perry. It's not like we're besties, but that's the kind of effect he had on people, right? He had that effect that you felt like you knew him. You felt like Chandler was your friend, right? You'd been through so many seasons with Chandler. And then, of course, in his other films. And many of us here on this call also listened to and read his memoir. And we even have a recording and an interview about that we all discussed the memoir about 1.5 years ago. We'll put the link to that in the show notes. But this is a tragic story that I hope turns out to save a lot of people's lives. And there's a saying that happens in recovery communities specifically, not so much sober communities, but in the recovery communities, you will hear it said that some of us have to die so that others of us can live. And that's because when we lose people to the disease of addiction, other people will be impacted by that and maybe will make different decisions or seek help sooner. So that's kind of where we're going to start off. So, Dr. Sarah, why don't we start with you and just maybe give me your thoughts on watching this documentary?
Well, first of all, like it just blows my mind that we were together and I didn't know this whole history about you and Matthew Perry. Like that's where I'm going, like that you were going through that at the time and I didn't know that. And I am going to be totally honest with you guys, and you guys are probably going to, it's really my age. I have seen one Friends episode in my entire life. So I don't even know like the whole, I know it's a phenomenon and obviously I know who the people are, but to me, it really got me and I always say this, it's addiction at its finest, right? And the thing we could talk forever about different aspects of the documentary, but one piece that you just reminded me of is when they had him talking about his book tour. He was on a book tour and he was being interviewed. And to be honest with you, I probably shouldn't say this, but he seemed high to me. And God. And that was just so brutal because I think that during that time of the book tour, he was totally struggling with this ketamine addiction. And I just think about being someone in recovery and the freaking cognitive dissonance and how do you go out on a book tour and you have to be so detached from what's happening to be able to be doing that. So that was so daunting, but that wasn't even what I was going to say. And he said, they said, we hear that you really like to help people, et cetera. And he said, yes, just in the last however long, 5 people have said that because of me, they've gotten sober and all this. So, absolutely, he's going to have a legacy to help people, but just freaking tragic. And the other thing I think a lot about, to me, the whole documentary was about kind of who's responsible, which was this weird ending to it, kind of, and it was very sensationalized. And I was annoyed quite a bit at like different parts of it. I thought some of it was really lame, but because it was so focused on like, who's the criminal? And yet this is addiction. This is what happens. And all these people involved. But going down that road, I ended up reading a bunch of stuff this morning about high-end treatment centers. And it's just all these people, actors, are suing these places. I was telling Tamar about this because there are no limits. There are all these people, these actresses saying they were like ordering in ketamine and they had their animals there and their trainers and nobody set a limit and they could do whatever they want. And yet they're getting 50 grand a month or 80 grand a month or whatever. So that whole thing about the financial piece and people taking advantage of these celebrities with money and stuff and forgetting that they're just another fucking addict dying from addiction. All right, I don't want to go on and on, but yeah, that whole piece was disturbing. Yeah.
Well, and let's talk about that, Alex. I'm going to kick this over to you. The sheer amount of money that he spent on rehab, he says it in his book. $9 million is what was announced in the book. So who knows what he spent post the book, right? So what are your thoughts on that? And echoing off of what Dr. Sarah just said.
I mean, I worked on a podcast that during Matthew Perry's book tour, we had him on to discuss the book. And during those very brief interactions, and I listened to it again to kind of try to get it fresh in my mind, I feel like I approached the documentary and my research prep for this in a different perspective. I work as a recovery coach through my foundation, and a lot of the work that we do is in helping people get towards their day one of recovery. And I don't want to. One of the golden rules of being a recovery coach is that you are in recovery when you say you are. So I don't want to discredit any of his days or what he may have considered him being in or working towards his recovery. But the whole part about the usage of ketamine within the recovery centers, while I know that this can be an effective and a helpful pathway to and through recovery, for somebody like Matthew Perry, who had gone to 14 inpatient treatment facilities, I think it was something like 65 detox centers, plus we're not even diving into the sober houses, sober companions, coaches, just everything that he tried to pour into it to seek out recovery. Introducing a substance like that could give him that feeling of, I can escape. I don't have to do the hard work. I don't have to struggle with, which for him, it truly seemed like there were these deep-rooted abandonment issues, which is what kept him going back and trying to fill that cup. And it's a cup that could fundamentally never be filled. When he was introduced to the ketamine by a provider, I think that was when the system absolutely and completely failed him. And I think that regardless of who gave him the ketamine, who was administering it, who was giving it to him, that one moment is why he is dead right now.
Just going to let that sit for a minute. Megan and Kim, because I know that you both identify your sobriety different than myself and Amy and Dr. Sarah do. I would love to hear from each of you how you feel about how Hollywood handles his struggles versus how we see celebrity addiction today. Like, you know, some of the phrases we throw around are not probably as common to you. I know you're familiar with them, of course, but how, through your lens of sobriety, what does that look like?
Yeah, I'll jump in. So, I echo what Dr. Sarah said about this, that I felt it was sensationalized. As a point of context, I did listen to Matthew Perry's words in his story about his life, friends, lovers, and the big terrible. I mean, that went much deeper. He shared a lot about his struggles, all the treatment centers he went through, so much money he had access to, and still, he was going back time and time again. The system is clearly messed up. Mm-hmm. So I went away from, Matthew Perry, A Hollywood Tragedy, which, by the way, is a terrible title because he's not the tragedy, thinking, what was the intended focus here? If the focus here was to piss me off, to, push people to act and change the fact that doctors were prescribing him when they shouldn't have been, to be upset that people were preying on him because of the money that he had, they didn't do a very good job. They brushed the surface on this whole deep issue. And I think this could have been a much stronger story if its intention really was to spur some action or some awareness. It was sensationalized.
Mm-hmm. Megan, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, I was kind of thinking of Preyed Upon as well, with kind of my first reaction when, yeah, like I kind of just knee jerk felt like Hollywood was just waiting for this inevitable, at least big story that he's no longer sober. I don't know if they were waiting for such a tragic ending, but I do think that this is more of a story of the tragedy of not even the wealthy per se. I mean, anyone in the system. It's Big Pharma. It's Big Pharma that it even, I think it was 20 years ago, started teaching doctors rather, to ask patients on a scale of 1 to 10, how heavy or how high is the pain, and just this concept of villainizing pain. I think it's a whole other conversation. So this idea that we should never have pain, and that pain isn't part of, whether you're talking physical or emotional, a natural part of healing and working through things, is just like a bigger narrative in how they constantly somehow work more drugs into the solution of anything people are going through. And then, it's obviously an institutionalized norm in these treatment centers. I don't remember from the book, but I do believe he tried a few international options, but I think it's more, to me, if anyone's the culprit, it's, the capital that runs Big Pharma, just pushing this narrative.
Amy, correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like I remember us talking about this in the previous recording where we talked about the book. If not, I know we definitely talked about it on one of our trips, that for gals like us who have spent many hours sitting in church basements, and Dr. Sarah, you're included in this, we kind of have an ear for when someone gets what that program offers and when someone doesn't. And I feel like I remember when we were reviewing the book and I listened to it. I have the book, but I also listened to it on Audible because I very much wanted to hear it in his voice. I really remember when going through that book thinking, he doesn't have it yet. Do you remember that way?
Absolutely. I remember thinking that. And, I love where this conversation has already gone, because so many things, I think that, the first thing that comes to mind for me is the only requirement for membership is a desire to stop drinking or using. It kind of is the phrase that floats to the top of my mind. So I think, maybe he just wasn't quite there yet. But I loved how they brought in the documentary, they brought that Frank Azaria, however you say it, that guy, who said, he really helped me. And I loved hearing that, because I am a 12-step believer for myself. And I know that for me, getting into action and helping others was, like, bar none, one of the key foundational principles for me. And I also think, along the lines of what Megan was saying, it is a greater conversation that I would love to have even later with this group sometime, is the whole concept of harm reduction. And I used to be, I'm not going to say against harm reduction. I'm going to say I didn't know anything about it. And so therefore I had sort of a knee-jerk, I'm going to confess, a little bit judgmental perception of what that was. Now, over time, my views and opinions have changed as I've seen people that I know very well pass away, and they were trying really hard to get clean and sober. And they could have used a little extra help, whatever that looks like. And the whole Big Pharma thing, and I won't go down any kind of weird path or political stance or anything, but I will say, and I know very little about the medical community in the grand scheme of things, but I really also feel like the answer is not to completely cut off opioids so that when people need a procedure, as we were talking about earlier, colonoscopy, we feel like drug seekers asking for, 2 pain pills for a foot surgery. And as a patient, that's really difficult, even when you're sort of in your mid 40s and north, where you've sort of found your voice, especially as women. It's really hard sometimes to say, this is what I need. And so if we swing the pendulum to the far other end, I think that's dangerous too. So I like the whole idea of maybe going forward, we have a team approach, right? Where it's doctors working with therapists. I realize this takes resources, and it's a lot of red tape and all of that. But I do think that, Matthew Perry is evidence that, we need a change. And maybe it's not a black and white change. Maybe it's somewhere in the middle, but it's a conversation that, in my opinion, should be ongoing.
Yeah. I also think it was really symbolic going back to the Batman. Batman is a symbol of a lot of things, but fighting inner demons is one of them. And that isn't lost on me. I'm sure it's not lost on any of you about the whole dual identity, because I know that when it's still in my cups, I was single mom, PTA, private Christian school, running the annual fundraiser, doing all the things. And then I had a completely different life at the local dive bar, two totally different worlds that never, connected. And when they started to, I was like, I got to get out of here. And I did, I left town. So what do we think? I think I want to now change the conversation, because the documentary does spend a lot of the time talking about the 5 people that they are trying to pin some responsibility to. 3 of the 5 have admitted guilt. And then there are 2 that are maintaining their innocence, and those trials have not yet occurred. I think the one that jumped out to me the most, the only one I could empathize with of the 5, is the personal assistant, because Matthew was in a position of power. I mean, that person was getting a paycheck, and it would be, if you don't do your job, there are a million other people that very easily want to be a personal assistant to a celebrity in Hollywood. So that's the only one of the 5 that I had any slight empathy towards. I'm curious how that landed for each of you. Go ahead, Kim.
Yeah, I hear you. I felt a tinge of empathy as well, trying to put myself in his shoes and understand his high pressure job. Mm-hmm. But at the end of the day, with any job, any choices you make in life, you have to set some boundaries. Mm-hmm. And if he was doing something that was putting someone's life potentially in danger, which it clearly was, mm-hmm. These were uncontrolled, illegal, the way they were using this substance was illegally done. I mean, that's crossing a line. And he mm-hmm. already had addiction issues. So mm-hmm. he had to have known there were risks mm-hmm. involved.
Sarah, what role does codependency play with these five people?
I had so many thoughts about, the word enabling, but, thinking about a celebrity, and again, we can't get anyone sober, obviously, but the degree of people, and I think the assistant talked about it, that are going to hang around and want to be with him and want to, and won't call him on his stuff, or won't, be honest or set limits or have consequences. I don't know what the consequences in his career were. I'm sure there were consequences, but there just seems to be so many people around these folks that are going to keep it going. I mean, I think I've talked about the Nicole Smith show that I couldn't watch because all these people are always around her, enabling and laughing about her addiction. And I just think I really feel this empathy for these people, because their chances to me are so much smaller when so many people are keeping it going because either of how much money they're making for them, of how much money they're paying them, of, if they speak up, they'll just be let go. I mean, I thought of the mental illness of the assistant, to be honest with you, because you think about folks that live with addicts or people in Al-Anon or us growing up in addiction or whatever, and how sick we become. A mentor of mine, I think I said this before, addict, 95% problems, 5% addiction, co-addict, 100% problems. Like, the people around the addicts get way sicker. And I think about that guy and what a bind he was in. And, he to me is just as sick. I mean, he was with him for, it said 10 years or something. I mean, how insane is your life going to get? And like Kim was just saying, he did have choices, but part of him, whatever, was in some kind of emotionally enmeshed relationship with him or just stayed for money. I mean, we have no idea. But that's why it just seems so tragic. And the whole celebrity thing, money thing is a specific, unique piece. Mm-hmm. And addiction is addiction, yes. And they have many more opportunities to keep it going. And I don't know, that piece is so tragic. Yeah, codependency is everywhere around this guy.
It did. I mean, we don't know this. It's not talked about in the documentary because the assistant was not interviewed. But right. I did wonder, did he go to Al-Anon ever? Once, twice, 100 times? Like, I did wonder that. I've also, as someone who, I'm going on 19 years and I've already outed myself for spending a lot of time in church basements, and between virtual and in-person meetings, I've had many opportunities to see celebrities who I obviously won't name in meetings. And I can tell you that it's not fair. The people that can't help themselves from getting starstruck. And I've been guilty of that for sure. I like to think that I'm cool, calm, and collected, but I was definitely not cool, calm, or collected the day I met Drew Barrymore. Like, I didn't even recognize myself. I just started blathering on like such an idiot. So I know it can happen, but it's so unfortunate when, these celebrities that are, very wealthy, very recognizable, come into the rooms and they're trying to share because they desperately need community. They desperately need a safe place to share. And people can't help themselves, but want to take a selfie afterwards or go up and they're trying to help them, but they're not trying to help them, right? They get sucked into that star power that it is so alluring. And it's I've seen it, and it's so unfortunate because I look at these people and I'm just like, they put their pants on the same as us. And if anything, I think they have it worse because the temptations are the accessibility of everything that's coming at them. I can't, which is why the universe has not made me famous or rich, because it knows that I can't handle it, right? It knows that I can't handle it. Amy, do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, I do. Probably the same reason I am not going to be famous. But yeah, I think that the whole enabling thing, that's got to be tough. I don't know what it's like to be an assistant for a celebrity. I don't know if they do performance reviews. I don't know. These are things that I might be thinking about, though, if I were an assistant to a celebrity. Like, how is this going to affect my career? Is someone going to write me a letter of recommendation or not? Like, I would be thinking all those things, plus the emotional attachment that I would naturally get to whoever I'm working for. So I'm also kind of that person that's like, oh, I'll help you bury the body. Like, I'm just that person naturally, like, I'm going to get on board. And so I think, first of all, it wouldn't be a healthy occupation for me. But also, second of all, I think it's complicated. I think there are layers to it. And I can think of many times that I have made decisions regarding some of my kids that maybe weren't the best, most moral choices. Now, were they life and death? No. But it's kind of one of those things where I could see how easy it is to maybe get more entangled than I'd like to just sit here and think.
Alex, there's a lot of stigma around relapse, and there's a lot of pressure around fame of addiction with what we've been talking about. How do you think documentaries like this, whether they're good or bad, they do shift the conversation because they create conversation? So do you feel like this documentary is helpful or harmful to our community as a whole, as a large?
I think the documentary has its own agenda where it wants to continue to perpetuate this narrative of criminalization. It spends a really long time building the case against the use of ketamine, describing how it is a category 3 drug and substance. And I think it's trying to, there's two tones that are at war with itself, where the one tone is, oh my God, look at this poor guy, Matthew. He was just like you and me, but he was an addict and it was horrible. But like, look at us, like power. We're like breaking the stigma. We're like really good. We're saviors of people like Matthew, and we're going to save so many lives. And then the other part of it is like, fuck all those addicts. I want y'all to go to jail. I want to get rid of the people giving the drugs. I want to get rid of people doing drugs. Like it felt like whiplash where it goes and you feel emotional and you're like, oh my God, like how could anyone have seen this coming? Honestly, if you are someone in his life and if you really listen to what he's saying in countless interviews, like way back in 2004, when Jennifer Aniston was interviewed for one of the first times with Diane Sawyer, and she's crying about how her friend Matthew is coming to work intoxicated and she's not even sure if he's alive. And you see him in, what is it, like 2021 for the Friends reunion. And he's talking about how like, wow, like, I can't believe I'm still alive. It paints the narrative that this is somebody who probably shouldn't be alive because of all of the substances and all of the damage that he has done to his body. And we really need documentary companies and people working in production to, like, it's the Hollywood Reporter. What were we really expecting? They're going to sensationalize. They're going to cater towards their audience and towards their narrative, which is that, oh shit, another celebrity died of an overdose. Let's make some easy money, throw together some bullshit, quick, made for TV documentary. We'll put on Peacock. We'll make Alex pay $8 just so that she can say a documentary to talk about it on podcasts. And it just perpetuates capitalist bullshit. But the core of it is that wasn't made with the intention of helping people and sparking conversations, because if it was, they would have reached out to somebody like Partnership to End Addiction or the Kennedy Forum or any of the other like NAMI that deal
Betty Ford,
with
anybody. Like there's so
members.
many.
Dealing with recovery. And I think the most haunting thing looking back is wondering, did he go with that book deal so that he could pay for his ketamine addiction?
I don't know if he needed to. I got the sense that he was well off for quite some time. But I don't know.
Do you think it might have been a cry for help, maybe? Because that's the other thing that I was wondering.
I mean, the reason I listened to the book instead of reading it was, like Alysse said, I wanted to hear his voice. And I feel like it was his genuine voice. Maybe he had me fooled and, it was all a deal to make more money for the ketamine. I don't know, but I sat with it as it was his authentic self. And at the end of the book, anyway, he was steady. I felt like he was at a good place. He could have fooled me again. It could have just been a game and what I wanted to hear at the end of the book, but I felt like he was at a good place again. And then the true tragedy struck. So we'll probably never know, will we?
We probably never will. I mean, it's sneaky, patient, and fatal.
I thought it was, considering the level of addiction that he, very well painted, it had not been that long that he'd been sober to be writing that book.
Right.
Yeah.
And you know what I think too? The Sober Curator, like our whole motto is, anybody can get sober. It's staying sober. Right. And, that's the thing. It's like he got sober a freaking zillion times, but did he ever really recover? Did he ever really reach that where he was really, did he really know, oh my God, I got to really surrender. I'm going to die. Or did he want to die? I don't know. That's a possibility too. I mean, but yeah, staying sober is a totally different thing. And I think in his environment, I mean, I just think, God, it's got to be tough. But it just was so trapped. Like the whole, like you guys are talking about, the years. I mean, it's not like anybody we don't, run into. People that have been using for 30 years and out of detoxes. I mean, I had a guy at McLean once that claimed he'd been in 100 detoxes and he was at McLean for 5 days. And he's like, I think I'm all set. And I'm thinking like, what is this? Like 101? I mean, but it takes what it takes. I don't know. I mean, but yes, staying sober is a different ballgame. So just to the Sober Curator, man, it's a big deal.
Well, let's try to wrap up here with something a little more lighthearted. So with the exception of Dr. Sarah, who's only watched one episode of Friends and can obviously not weigh in, does anyone have a favorite Chandler Bing moment that is a real standout from the show? Alex?
Instead of a favorite Chandler moment, I want to give a favorite Matthew Perry moment.
Okay.
Which is that his foundation is currently funding 18 nonprofits, which are oriented towards recovery. And there's a few initiatives that they're doing that I think are really honoring the legacy and the memory of him. One of them is a collaboration between the Matthew Perry Foundation and a public health institute, where they're providing support for incarcerated individuals who are living with opioid use disorder. And the foundation is also working to partner with the Massachusetts General Hospital to address health disparities and to advance leadership in addiction medicine. And they also have a really great initiative called Grassroots Recovery Grants, where they work to offer financial assistance to diverse groups to play a crucial role in offering hope and recovery for individuals affected by substance use disorders. And I think this really hits at the core of who he is. One of the first things that you see when you go to the foundation website is a quote from him that I believe is also in the book, which is, "When I die, I want helping others to be the first thing that's mentioned. Addiction is far too powerful for anyone to defeat alone, but together, one day at a time, we can beat it down." And while I think it's tragic that he never truly gained long-term sustained recovery, he did have moments of clarity in his sobriety where he could clear his head from the fog and he could feel at peace. And while I think it's tragic that he is giving others what he couldn't truly achieve, I think it's a beautiful way to find meaning in his life and his legacy, to give other people the peace that he himself couldn't find while he was on this earth.
And we will put a link to the foundation and all of that information in the show notes as well. All right. Any Chandler Bing moments? That was a very good segue, though, Alex.
Yeah. It was a good segue, and I feel like weird sharing. Like
following it up with something funny.
Yeah.
But please do. Please do.
We need it. Please, Megan.
I don't know if it's how funny it is, but I mean, for me, one of the juiciest wins is when Monica and Chandler had the secret sex going on.
Oh, yeah, that was good.
That was, I don't know, half a season, I feel like, in little bits, but I felt like they were really supposed to be together. So,
well, one of the things when I think about, him throughout all the seasons, one of the things that they do mention in the documentary, it's definitely mentioned in his book, is you can, with his weight gain and loss, you can tell where he's at in his addiction as far as what's prevalent, whether it was alcohol or whether it was drugs, based off of, how his body would change. And that's something that I experienced myself and really identified with. Amy, since I know you have a pool, if you could have any logo glowing at the bottom of your pool, I mean, besides the Sober Curator logo, what logo might you put? It's going to be a big A, isn't it? It's going to be a big A. I know it is.
Well,
it's going to be a big A.
The Sober Curator logo would be choice
obviously.
number 1.
Obviously.
Choice number 2 would be a ginormous A, because it does apply to both you and me, Alysse. Choice number 3 would be a big, giant disco ball. Would it be
That's not what I
metallic?
thought you were going to say.
Yes, it would.
All right. Now, Kim, I'm going to put you on the spot. You're not prepared for this, or maybe you are. But if you had to make a mocktail, an alcohol-free cocktail called the Chandler Bing, what would the ingredients be?
I'm not sure what the base spirits would be, but obviously there's a cherry on top. And there's an amazing cocktail pick holding that cherry on the edge to be enjoyed and loved at the very end.
Oh, that was good. That was really good.
So lovely.
And I have to say, I do have a logo at the bottom of my pool. Here's my story there.
Okay.
We have a sports court. We don't have a pool, but we can go off our deck and look out onto it. And I was going to paint something on it with my daughters. And we had a little competition. And I asked my husband, what should we paint? Do you want to weigh in? He said, because we live in Seattle, I want to step outside and see the sun every day.
Oh.
So we painted a big sun, amongst other things, on the sport court. And it's really cool because you can go and look in Google Earth, and it's easy to find our house because there's sunshine.
Oh.
Yeah, so you don't have to have a pool to have the bat signal.
That's fascinating.
That is so cool.
All right. Well, I'm going to burn the Sober Curator logo into my backyard grass then. Thanks for the idea. Well, as we close here today, our final thoughts. Matthew Perry gave us laughter. He gave us honesty, and he gave us a real look at addiction. This documentary reminds us that sobriety is a journey. It is not a destination. And if you are struggling, you are not alone. We have a full resource section on the site of alcohol and substance use disorder resources, regionally and nationally. We also have a recovery nonprofit resource guide and an LGBTQ resource guide. And I think Alex has a few more resource guides hidden up her sleeve that will be published shortly. We've got more pop culture on the site. We love pop culture, at least I do. So please subscribe, follow, and stay tuned. You can subscribe to the Sober Sip, which is our weekly email newsletter. You can find us over at thesobercurator.com, and we are at the Sober Curator across all social platforms. That is all the time we have today. As we like to say at the Sober Curator, thank you, Dr. Sarah, for pointing this out earlier. Getting sober matters. Staying sober, it just matters more. Thanks for tuning in. This is Alysse Bryson. And until next time, keep it real, keep it fun, and keep it sober. Thanks for tuning in, because let's be real, we're way more fun than your ex's drunk texts.
If you laughed, learned, or just need more of our voices in your life, honestly, I mean, who wouldn't? Hit that subscribe button, leave us a review, and send this episode to your sober or your I swear I'm only drinking on the weekends besties.
And if you have a story, feedback, or hey, maybe you just want to slide into our DMs like it's 2012, well, we're here for it. Find more curated magic at thesobercurator.com. And remember, getting sober matters, staying sober matters more. Until next time, keep it real, keep it fun, and keep it sober.